All right, guys, time to get down to another special episode of the Mr. GLOAT podcast, ladies and gentlemen. This one, we are recording this just as the boxing matches in Madison Square Garden are here, and I like to make this a quick one. So, ladies and gentlemen, seeing the background, walls, everything else right over there. To be honest, if you guys already saw my last video that was yesterday ago, and everything else talked about moving out to my house and moving out for everything else, can't pay the rent and everything else there. Well, I'm here and it's time for my first ever video. And what would be a good start for my top 5 worst trilogies in boxing history? Now, when I say this, guys, I mean the worst. And these are my least favorite, which is the worst of all time. And I have to say, even though the Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano 3 is happening as of today, with the first boxing match, I thought the match was a draw, 50-50. It was a tie. And the second match was like, okay, it was a close match. And after 9 rounds, 2 of the judges were favoring it. Is a tie. Final round, Serrano gets the final round done, but 2 of those judges give it to Taylor, and it all became ridiculous. So yeah, it was controversial. So seeing Katie Taylor, if she wins this fight fair and square, it makes you wonder: is this the worst trilogy match of all time? Well, technically, is it the worst of the 21st century? Well, is it the worst in women's boxing history of trilogies? Well, there is no women's trilogies in this list yet. But nothing could be said, ladies and gentlemen, than my top 5. So, for the next 30 to 40 minutes, relax and enjoy my trilogy. And if Teddy Atlas, if you have any picks out there for the worst trilogy, feel free. Because my number 5 pick, ladies and gentlemen, of the worst trilogy have to start somewhere. You got to start the worst trilogy from the top, but sometimes that's not the case. Because when you start talking about the worst trilogies of all time, you have to start at the bottom. And even though the first trilogies I'm going to talk about might be questioned for some of you people, it makes you wonder, are they that bad? Well, guys, even though back in the year of 2014 or so, or 2013 on YouTube Boxing Scenes, someone did pull out the worst trilogy matches of all time. And there's only one moment in the comments that was never talked about to be the worst trilogy. We had a famous boxer, the Mexican legend, fighting out with over 90 professional fights. He comes out of nowhere, and before you know it, he picks his first professional loss. His first professional loss. And that guy also, in hindsight, managed to pick up history as the first guy to beat that Mexican legend. Now, this guy passed away in 2020 in December the 23rd at 59 years old. Legend boxer. And he won his first ever titles, which was one of his few world titles as in the light welterweight division, or super lightweight, whatever you like to call it, depending on who's asking who, because he would only hold on for some of these titles for only less than 3 years. Because on January the 29th, 1994, they pick up the fight in the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. They pull out of each other. They throw every single punch. And then the challenger on Don King Promotions, this American, scores out the first knockout in this Mexican boxer's career in the 11th round of 12-round fights. And even though he was penalized for blows in that 11th round and the 7th, which did cause moments in the fight, because the Mexican fighter, not only he suffered a knockdown, he also cost himself a penalty point in that round as well, like the 7th round. One of the judges had it 114 to 113. The other had it for the other fighter, and 116 to 111 higher for that other fighter was a win. A few months later, on May the 7th, back in the same venue, we pull out. Instead of Richard Steele being the ref, they had Mills Lane being the referee. The fight went on pretty decent. Both fighters were studying each other. The Mexican starts out the first round easily, and then the champion comes out with a couple rounds of his own from 2 to 3. The 4th round goes to the Mexican, 5th round for the American, 6th round for the Mexican, and the 7th round for the American. So it was pretty obvious what you were witnessing. We go to the 8th round, and this is the moment when all controversy breaks loose. A reported penalty of a headbutt, accidental headbutt. Mills Lane, due to under WBC rules, the champion was penalized for 1 point in that 8th round. Due to it being accidental, and it was Mills Lane being the referee, yeah, his point was taken away. They had to go to a technical scorecard, and 2 of the fighter judges had it 76 to 75 for each, 177 to 74 for the Mexican. It was a technical decision. The Mexican won. But guess what? They never had a trilogy match. The Mexican continued winning on fights, but he did actually lost fights along the way in his career against some good fighters. Rematch fights. By 2000, his career was done. But for the American, his career went on poorly. His career came badly by 1997, and by 1999, from 2001, he lost a record of 7 professional fights in those 2 years. He won a couple fights against nobodies, lost a fight for an IBU title, and by 2003, after having a close win against a nobody and a loss against a nobody, the Mexican fighter went on. On May the 22nd, 2004, they had a rematch. The problem was there's no fight footage of this fight. But the scorecards were close. 2 of them had 98 to 92, and 1 had it 99 to 91. The winner of that trilogy was Julio Cesar Chavez defeating Frankie Randall. So why is this the worst trilogy of all time? Technically, the reason I put this at number 5, it's not the worst trilogy. I call this the Forgotten Trilogy. This is the Forgotten Trilogy of all time. And by the way, speaking about Frankie Randall and Cesar Chavez's career after their meeting, by 2005, Frankie Randall would go back on January the 1st, 2005, lose a fight. Month and a half later, another loss. And then in July, he lost again, and that was it. For Cesar Chavez, he fought in May due to his 25th anniversary of being in boxing. And then September, he lost a fight against a fighter where he broke his... Well, he suffered a broken right hand. Well, I was going to say shoulder, but it was actually a broken right hand. And, yeah. And fun fact, his son, Chavez Jr., the drug lord that's got arrested recently, even after his Jake Paul loss, also lost his first ever fight in a similar fashion than his father's last fight. So, funny news about that. Is this the worst trilogy of all time? No, it's not. It's not. But when you look back at it, there's other fights out there that you can say are good. Like the Ali and Frazier, Gotti versus Ward, they had their own meaning of great trilogies. Even if they ended it in fashions that we didn't want to see it end. Like, I don't know how to explain it to you, but there's a lot of controversy out there. But because the Cesar Chavez versus Frankie Ward is a forgotten trilogy, because yes, the first fight had penalty point abductions, and the second one was controversial because of WBC rules, and it was Mills Lane being the referee. The third fight was never filmed, and Frankie Ward was already in a losing streak, and Chavez, he was on fire during his final year. So the trilogy was, it was just a quick money, get rich money quick scheme. Just forget about it, because at the end of the day, the trilogy is just forgotten in the space-time continuum because none of us know about it, which is why I put it at number 5. It's the most forgotten trilogy of all time. But number 4, people can say this is the worst trilogy of all time. The worst trilogy in the 21st century, when the first match happened in the 21st century, and it lasted, the trilogy in the 21st century, yes. This is the worst trilogy in the 21st century of all time, if you count 3 matches in the 21st century. Because if you actually include one match in the 20th century and the other 2 matches in the 21st, or similar, 2 in the 20th and 1 in the 21st, that doesn't count. Because there is one on this list that is the worst than this. I know there's going to be controversy about this fight, so I'm going to ignore it as quickly as I can. A tough fighter, a 2-time undisputed champion, cruiserweight to heavyweight, takes on a guy that was a Puerto Rican man, born in Massachusetts. Just like Rocky Marciano, and his Italian immigrants and his Italian were Italians when he was born in Massachusetts. The guy suffered a first-round knockout in under 30 seconds, and people thought his career was done. They had the Canadian/British last undisputed 3-belt champion in 1999 he was going to fight, but the undisputed champ said, no, here, take the WBA belt with you. And what happened? The old past prime fighter that was a 3-time heavyweight champion would get his rematch after losing that title in 1999 for undisputed. He came out there, he did the boss, he did an amazing job. The thing was, he should have been the winner of the entire trilogy. The problem is, no one won this trilogy. Not one person won this trilogy in a million years. The real deal was past his prime, and another guy is just trying to recover from his controversies of losing. And considering the champion was 37 years old and the Massachusetts guy was 28 years old, both 6'2" tall, they both fought each other in hard fashion. The first fight had sloppiness, but at the end of the day, the 3-time heavyweight champion came out on top with a close victory score. After sizing it up, after barely giving it a 115 to 113 score, for the real deal, became 4-time heavyweight champion. The man from Massachusetts would be the last heavyweight in the New England territory. You guys know what it is? The real deal versus the quiet man. I think it's probably best to just spit it out. Evander, the real deal Holyfield versus John, the quiet man Ruiz. This trilogy just says it all. This one says it all. So the first match went on, I wouldn't say boring, because it had history, it had amazement, and it made you wonder who was going to be champion. And also keep this in mind, guys, because this was also on Don King Promotions about 6 years during the Chavez and Frankie Randall. And no, in 2004, there was no Don King. It was forgotten. But yeah, when you look at the first fight and you do see moments where anyone would have been champion, like, don't get me wrong, there were times that anyone would have won the fight. And even though Ruiz did said he won the fight, because he said it, a lot of fighters say they won the fight. Ruiz said he won the first fight. It was a highway robbery without a gun, he said. He had the fight under control against the past prime fighter. And even though, keep this in mind, guys, Alexander Usyk is 38 years old, 27-year-old Daniel Dubois. That goes to show you for age differences. But that's the same thing as Francisco Pianeta. He was 28 years old when Vladimir Klitschko was 37 years old back in 2013. When they both fought each other. And Klitschko won. So, yet again, there was past prime into this, but Holyfield went on to become champion. And then crazy or not, because by August the 12th, during that time in the Las Vegas of Paris, they went to Mandalay Bay in March the 3rd. And the fight went out surprisingly because John Ruiz had to earn some interesting moments there. And it's even surprising because in the 11th round, he scored out some amazing points in here and there. In round 9, there was another moment where there was cheating. Like, I will say, though, guys, when watching the fights back of any other fight, when John Ruiz scored an amazing good knockout in the round, when he tumbled Holyfield to the ropes, and, of course, there was a point abduction in round 10, and so the points were already there from the start. So I would say that there was something to it that meets the eye. But would you ever say anyone would have won this fight? Technically, Ruiz won the fight clear. He was free and clear of all the discharges from everything involving, like, forgive my pergnosity here, but I think Evander Holyfield was past his prime for what he was. Like, because he did finish the fight as best as he could, but Ruiz was more of a tougher, good person that day, and he went on to it. This would be the end for Evander Holyfield's championship for his entire career, for the next 11 years. And he would have controversies because the fight was not as entertaining as it is. Like, the 12-round barrages that were so dangerous from everything else, like, the champions were just on fire for all the craziness. But the worst part is, on December the 15th in Foxwoods Resort, which would be in Connecticut, a New England territory, would settle the difference as a stalemate. Live on USA HBO, of course, the final fight ended in controversy. I had Holyfield winning the first couple rounds. He had round 3. He had round 6, round 8, and 9, definitely. Round 10 was a close round for Holyfield, barely. And mostly round 12, which was a dominant round for him. I had it 8 rounds to 4. And the thing was, 2 of the judges had it 116 to 112, favoring for Holyfield, which was Julie Lederman, the accurate score, 115 to 113 by Don O'Neill for Ruiz, and Tom Kazmarek, 114 even. The fight was a split draw, stalemate. Yeah, no one won the battle, but Ruiz won the war because he regained the title. and Holyfield's career. Like, Ruiz's career would end badly, but not without a couple more titles and controversies and other moments until the end of him with David Hay, and that would come to an end. Holyfield suffered a lot, from barely winning a Hasim Rotman, from a Chris Bird to a James Toney, which was the end of his career, from Larry Donald. And yes, his win should have been against Sultan Ibagirmamov from Russia. Wasn't much to talk about, but Nikolai Valiev, yeah, tough. They do say that the WBF might be major one day, and if he does, he might be a 5-weight champion because his win in 2010 against Francis Botha was a good win. But after his Brian Nielsen win in 2011, he just ended it with a bang. So he was past his prime, but he just never gave up. And that's what I like about Holyfield. Number 2, guys, is another legend that makes me wonder, how did this trilogy match happen? Considering the first 2 matches happened during the end of the 20th century, and with all due to respect from all of the indigenous, because it's indigenously shocking that this happened. We have 2 guys that lost their first professional fight in their debut. And then one day, years later, the legend went on to become a champion in 1995. It should have been in 1994, but it ended in a split draw. He won in a rematch, which was vacant, because the first fight was vacant. He went on to defend the title several times against great fighters like Joe Lipsy, Glenn Johnson, John David Jackson, and it was so amazing. His opponent, on the other hand, a guy living in Georgia, Stone Mountain, Georgia, the champion living in Delaware, are 2 fighters that were in so different worlds. The most controversial thing about this is the first fight. And Mills Lane was also involved in this match as well. And I think this might have been the moment when Mills Lane realizes that I'm too old for this, because this was 1 year after the Mike Tyson and the Holyfield 2 fight, the ear bite, and the Lennox Lewis versus Henry Akinwande. So when you had Mills Lane coming into this fight and knowing how past prime boxers that used to be good referees were not in their prime anymore, this might have been the reason why he retired a year later. Seriously, because this might have been Mills Lane's last legit moment of why he quit boxing, for the reason that was obvious. In 1998, he went on to ref these 2 guys. And in the first 3 rounds, the champion was so amazed. But then in round 4, before coming to the end of the round, due to as many clinches these guys put each other, the champion and the challenger were clinching on. Mills Lane tried to back and throw them off, and before the bell rung, he tried to shove them out of the way, similar than the Lennox Lewis and Henry Akinwande, and it was so tough. He tried to shove them as best he could, and then, the champion falls out into the ropes, and the match ended in a no contest. Oh, yeah. The first match ended in a no contest in Las Vegas in the Hilton. And guess what? That was also by Don King Promotions. Only in Showtime. Live on Showtime. Keep that in mind. And that was August the 28th, 1998. 2 days after I was born. But then, in District of Columbia in February the 6th, 1999, they had their rematch. The champion finally found his footing. He took him on. The referee was Rudy Battle. Interesting name. Haven't heard of him, but I want to know him more. Took out the knockout. The champion knocked him down in the second. Knocked him down in the 6th. And then in the 7th round, The challenger just couldn't handle it anymore, and it was over. So yeah, that's all you have to know about this entire trilogy. It was a waste of time. But how did we get the third trilogy? Well, we would have to go back 5 years in the future. So the challenger is trying to recover. He loses another fight 5 months later against someone in France. He wins some fights against nobody fights. But then he gets an interesting fight in 2002, picks up an interesting win against Dwayne Williams. After his Marlon Hayes win, he wins a fight against Tito Mendoza for the IBF middleweight title. The title he fought a few years ago against his rivalry. Only this time he only had 3 professional fights in 2003, only to wait another 2 more years until June of 2004. The champion, on the other hand, he just continued winning. After his rematch win, he defeated guys like Sid Vanderpool, Keith Holmes, and Felix Trinidad, the undefeated fighter, weeks after 9/11, to become undisputed. He defeated guys like Carl Daniels, William Joppy. And after William Joppy, guess what? He was actually fixing himself up to fight against Oscar De La Hoya. Now in 2004, guys, Oscar De La Hoya had a fight against Felix Sturm in the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. The same night where these two guys I'm talking about fought the same night. But before that fight happened in controversy, because they were going to build themselves up for a 4-belt undisputed, which would never become a WBO legit thing until 2007, went on. So yeah, the IBF title eliminator went on, and guess what happened? These two guys meet again for the last time after 5 years. The champion went on, while the challenger decided to disqualify himself. Well, he put out a low blow in the 5th round, and he got knocked down in round 7. But hey, he survived 12 rounds. The scorecards were 117 to 109 by one judge, and the other two, 119 to 107. That's all you need to know. I just can't explain the fight. The fighters were the one and only Bernard Hopkins versus Robert Allen. After the first fight, the second fight was already an icing on the cake that this was no need for a rematch. Had to wait 5 years later. Robert Allen got a title eliminator 2 years ago, only to get this. Guess what? Oscar De La Hoya got controversy win to become a 6-weight class champion after the Felix Sturm fight, with all judges 115 to 113. Yeah. And of course, 3 months later, well, Bernard Hopkins defeated De La Hoya by round 9 KO. And of course, that was his legit 20th title defense after that. His 20th title defense came on against Howard Eastman until he lost against Jermaine Taylor in 2005. And that whole thing with Taylor. And then the last 10 years of his career are all something that was good. And then it ended a knockout loss against Joe Smith. While Robert Allen, he retired, came back in 2006 in October, picked up a win, another one 2 months later, and then May of 2007, last win, and he retired. So yeah, I really can't say much about this other than ridiculous. But speaking about ridiculous, guys, this might be the worst trilogy of all time. So why is it number 3? Don't get me wrong, guys. There is another trilogy out there that ended with 2 guys that had 12-round wins. And the third fight ended where the challenger that lost twice against this guy got 5 penalty points and it ended in a disqualification. It's not that worse. And I'm not going to explain it because I actually forgot what it was called, who their names were again. I know one is Bobby McCark versus someone else. I forgot his name. But then when you talk about Roberto Duran versus Sugar Ray Leonard, yeah, the first fight was not bad. It was just Roberto Duran was good that night. And the second one ended in controversy because he quit. And the third fight, they were past their primes. It wasn't a bad trilogy, but I've seen worse. It wasn't that bad, but not worse than being in the top 5. This one right here is something that people should talk about because this is almost like a rendition of SummerSlam, where Jerry the King Lawler kind of made Jake the Snake Roberts' career a miserable hell because of this storyline where they made Jake the Snake Roberts look like a drunken person as drunk in alcohol, which got his career for the next few years for a lot of controversies. Yeah, this fight right here says it all. And I hate to say it, it's another Don King incident. Man, every Trilogy match will always be a Don King. Well, to be honest, guys, the third Trilogy match was, keep this in mind, guys, don't get me wrong. Even though Bernard Hopkins and Robert Allen were their first 2 fights were for Don King, the other fight in 2004 was Bob Arum. So keep that in mind. But this one was have Don King all over his fingerprint. Like, this was Don King's fingerprints all over this trilogy for all the dumb reasons. A guy named Terrible went into boxing, and he lost twice against a guy that won the battle, but he lost the war in the third fight. He was known as Cucuso from Dominican Republic. A guy that's lost so many fights, but he was hard to knock out. Well, technically, it wasn't hard for this American dude to do it because he sure, boy, I really hate this one. I'm really going to hate talking about this one. I guarantee it. Oh, boy. Guys, I'm just going to say it. It's Terry Norris versus Luis Santana. There's just nothing to say, guys. So the first fight, guys, taking place in Mexico. Not bad. In November the 12th, 1994. Due to the card of Humberto Gonzalez versus Michael Carbaja and everything else about the others. But this fight went on ridiculous. Like, it's ridiculous of how Norris managed to get nothing interesting. Like, he managed to pull out, making Santana miss everything in the first 2 rounds. And then he had a fluke knock. Like, Luis Santana got a scored knockout on Terry Norris. And I think that's the moment when Terry Norris was a upset dude in that fight. Because in the fourth fight, we did have a moment where there was a moment where something went on badly, and which was bad. Because Norris was deducted a point due to headbutt that was created a cut on top of Santana's head, but the 5th punch made it more awesome. He threw a rabbit punch, a blow rabbit punch in the back of Santana's head, hammering him. Guess what? When you look at the video, he did not nail him as hard as you think he did. And the problem was, they were waiting for Santana to get his butt back up for over a bunch of minutes. And they called it a disqualification. Luis Santana, WBC Super Welterweight Champion, carried out in a stretcher. And the crowd showed displeasure by throwing seat cushions into the ring, shouting insults at Terry Norris. But guys, when you look at the replay and Norris, yes, it was legit for what he did, but he didn't hammer the back of Santana's head intentionally. Yeah. And the WBC officials said Santana suffered a mild concussion from the blow, wasn't responding for 10 minutes. And it also stated that Santana, the thing is, even though it was a shot in the back of the head, it was a glancing shot, but it really looked like Santana was faking, Norris said. His eyes was wide open, but when the doctors came over to him, he closed them, and so I think you can already tell this was just bad. But it just gets worse, because several months later, this time in Caesar's Palace, outside Door Arena on April the 8th, Kenny Bayless would be the referee for the second match. By the way, Mitch Halpern was the first. And then Kenny Bayless was the second, and Joe Cortez was the third. Guess what happened? The first round, Norris just wanted to end it all. He hurt Santana, but then in the second round, he knocked him down. He knocked him down in the third round. And then I questioned something. So the bell kind of rings. Kenny pushes them back. He tells Norris to leave or get out of the ring. Then he goes to Santana. Instead of telling him to, like, it looked like he was talking to Santana, telling him to make a fight out of it or I'm going to stop. Because how many times have you ever seen a referee talk to a fighter after the bell rung for the end of the round? Because it seemed like Terry Norris didn't hear the bell. Terry Norris did not hear the bell, and the bell ring wasn't that loud. But the thing was, you would have noticed that it was already 3 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. And the thing was, why did Kenny Bayless not know? Because as he was talking to him, Norris was touching the back part of the top upper part of the bottom base part of Kenny's back onto his butt. Terry Norris was touching the referee's butt of his back part of it. So how do you not feel him? As Kenny Bayless finally stops talking to Luis Santana, Luis is about to walk back to his corner, which was in the wrong way because he's walking this way to Norris's corner, I guess, or something. I think. I forgot. Norris pushes out the referee and slams the head right into Luis Santana, and Luis bams right into the canvas. And Kenny disqualifies him, not knowing that he didn't hear the bell. The commentators pointed it out. He didn't hear it. And guess what, guys? You know what makes this moment interesting? This is the first time that a fighter has ever won a world champion for the first time being carried out on a stretcher. And also, he is the first time to ever defend that title while being carried out on a stretcher again. And the first time in boxing history to do both of those without not exiting the ring on his own strength in any other titles of his career. Luis Santana became the first person in World Championship Trilogy to win 2 fights in the first 2 fights of Trilogy, only to lose the third fight. Even though when he won the battle, he lost the war. So Luis Santana broke so many barriers with this trilogy for all the wrong reasons. That's how funny this was. Oh boy. But guess what, guys? 4 months later in April, August the 19th, live in MGM Grand, under the undercard of Peter McNeely and Mike Tyson and the Bruce Seldon and Joe Hip WBA title and Quincy Taylor and Julian Jackson. All the stars are here. And these 2 guys show up. Terry Norris makes a huge interview saying that he's going to promise to hear the sound of the bell, promise not to make legal punches. He wants fans to know that he's not a cheater, this or that. And he does it. He goes to the first round. He hurts him. But the problem is, guys, the reason I think this is like a Jake the Snake Roberts and a Jerry the King Lawler in SummerSlam of 1996 is because I don't think Luis Santana was training his butt off. Even after he won the title, it looked like he wasn't even training. It almost looked like he thought, hey, Terry Norris is going to disqualify himself again. He did. Now they're going to have a third match. I don't think Luis Santana was ever training himself to even take this fight seriously. This guy was an American, and he's from the Dominican Republic, so he knows that these guys from the U.S. are going to kill him. And he decides not to train at all. The first fight ended in 5 rounds. The second fight, 3 rounds. This one, 2 rounds. This is like a guy that was drinking alcohol and not taking, sorry for flipping you people off, but this was almost like a guy taking alcohol without not training the box. Like he thought, hey, I'm just going to win this fight. I won't feel a thing. He got knocked out 3 times. And the second time he got knocked out, I was like, Joe Cortez, can you just end this fight? Just F this. Don't care if he gets back up again. Well, after 2 minutes in the second round, 3rd knockout, end of the fight, that's all I care about. It was the worst trilogy, and that's why I hate this trilogy so much. It looked like Luis Santana was not even trying. He wasn't trying at all, and that's what upsets me the most. But guys, if that was the worst trilogy I would ever say, because it's controversial. The final trilogy on this match has to be the controversy of it. This number one worst trilogy of all time is a guy that had his 50th professional fight ending in fatality. And the person that killed him would go on in the next 5 or so years to become a 5-time world champion, maybe a 6-time world champion in 3 weight classes. And his first champions was this trilogy. Yeah. And the reason I say it is because this is the controversy of what it's like when national television gets banned for boxing for life. Because you have a guy that's from Cuba, a guy born in the U.S. Virgin Islands. It's just like a guy from the U.S. Virgin Islands. You still following me? And you have a guy that's born in Santa Clara, Cuba. And his 50th professional fight ends in tragedy. Now, I'm also questioning Deontay Wilder and Derek Chisora because they're in their 49 professional fights, and I hope their 50th professional fight won't end this way. But the reason this one is the most controversial is because of the stuff that happened outside of the ring. Now, I couldn't find a lot of information about the fights other than the champions. So, this guy from the U.S. Virgin Islands is moving on into his career by 59, and for the next 19 years until 1977, his 18 years in boxing would change for a lot. Well, technically his first fight debuts came in 58, so it was 19 years. He went on, lost some fights, but he moved on to try to fight some interesting fighters. And he did. He fought good fighters at his prime during his first years. Until he fought the guy that would later become his trilogy. The Cuban fighter that lost some fights and lost against good guys that would also take on the guy from the U.S. Virgin Islands, living in the U.S. He lost some fights during 1959 and went on to have problems. But until 1961, the guy picked up a world championship in Las Vegas in 1960. He lost against some fighters in 1960 and 61 in non-title fights. And when I talk about how many times he's lost fights, some of these fights back in the old days, people can fight in non-title fights a bunch of times before fighting a world title for a championship, even if they lost. So the first fight in April the 1st, 1961, from April the 1st, 1961 to March the 24th, 1962. The problem is, for the next 368 days, this Cuban was going to die. And I don't think he was going to expect it. For under a year, these 3 guys fought. And back then, you can fight multiple times against the same fighter, even if they beat you or you beat them. Now, the first fight is hard to find information other than the fight ended in a round 13 KO against the guy from the U.S. Virgin Islands. Picks up the win. Almost 6 months later, the Cuban picked up an upset victory, this time in Madison Square Garden. So the first match ended in Miami Beach. This one took place in Madison Square Garden. Now, even though for the first, there were official scores that did thought the first fight was close and some other stuff, but with the second fight, they went on their own way. There were times, and the second fight, I think they did say the second fight was on ABC. This was live on ABC. And just to let you guys know, HBO boxing was never a thing until January 22nd, 1973, due to the George Foreman and Joe Frazier fight. And Showtime boxing was never until March of 1986. So technically, those television shows would not be along until then. So back in 1960 was ABC. So the worst is yet to come because my nose is itching, and I just, I don't want to talk about this. So the guy from the U.S. Virgin Islands, when he picked up his first win, he had some title fights in June and July against a non-title fight, lost. He won a few, three more fights during the later and early part of 61, 62. And then by the month of March, tragedy struck. So the Cuban fighter did had one fight in December for the NAB NBA middleweight title. So he was the welterweight champion, but went up middleweight, lost in a 10-round fight domination. Now keep in mind his last 6 professional fights were a loss, win, loss, win, and a loss. So his resume was bad. He had 11 losses, 35 wins, 3 draws, and he was going to pick up his 12th and final loss. His last 7 fights would be 2 wins and 5 losses. So it makes you wonder why the referee continued to ref this fight. But yet again, back then it was different. But guys, what happened outside of the ring before the fight is the stuff that I don't want to talk about. And to be honest, guys, I might as well just say their names. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to a guy that would become winning his first ever world title, which would later become tragedy. A man that would live for the next 51 years until he passed away in Hampstead, USA on July the 23rd, 2013. The one and only Emil Griffith versus the Cuban boxer Benny the Kid Parrott. I don't know what to say about this. I really don't know how to explain in details about this. I was going to keep this a secret, but yet again, it's probably best to say it right now before it's too late. Guys, one day before the fight, it later stated during a weigh-in, stated that Benny the Kid Parrott was assaulting Emil Griffith. Where during the weigh-in, he called Emil Griffith Maricon. Maricon. And this was spelled in a, well, mostly it's mostly a, well, it's not an English word, if that makes sense. It was a Spanish word. Both boxers understood what it meant in a 6-letter word. Maricon in English stands for faggot. So the story goes that Emil Griffith, during the time in his boxing career, he actually worked in a women's hat factory. And he later designated hats. It's stated that he would come out as bisexual in his later years, but in 62, allegations of homosexuality and things considering fatal, it was already, there was a lot of stuff in an athlete's career back then. It was grievous insults. And it was also crazy because it stated that during the weigh-in, it also stated that his girlfriend, Griffith's girlfriend at the time, like, his girlfriend actually asked him about the incident, saying, I didn't know about you being that way. But yet again, back in those days, just because you worked in a clothing store that was for women, like, guys, even Herb Abrams in his UWF promotional wrestling show, he worked in a clothing industry for women at the time, and they didn't call him gay. No, he was with women, storing out cocaine with women at the time before his death and everything during his career in UWF. So that doesn't make you gay. But back in the 60s, we're serious. So the fight went on several rounds, and before you know it, in round 12, and yes, back then, 15 rounds were still a thing in the next 20 to 25 years until the 12th round came. They studied each other. They pushed them forward. And around the 2-minute mark, Benny faltered back, and Griffith threw out every single right punch, cornering him out to a corner rope. He's stumbling, and then one of his gloves is hanging him on. Every time he's about to fall, Emil keeps punching. And Ruby Goldstein, the veteran referee at the time, was also criticized. He stopped the fight, and Benny falters his glove and falls back. People thought he had exhaustion. Sadly, he would be unconscious, laying in a coma. He'll be in the hospital for the next 10 days until April the 3rd. 367 days after their first fight on April the 1st, 1961. And you know what's even worse? This was also the first time in history that ABC, because this was the weekly fight program known as Fight of the Week in 1960 to 1964, where ABC TV at the time was a thing. And I'm sure they never broadcast the Muhammad Ali and Sonny Liston 1 fight, or even the 2 fight, or any other broadcast back then were tough. That's what makes this the worst trilogy of all time, because this is like a rendition of Owen Hart breaking Stone Cold Steve Austin's neck in SummerSlam 1997. And that might have been the worst SummerSlam moment of all time. This is the worst trilogy of all time because of national television and the situation of anti-gay bisexuality and everything else happening into the ring and fatality in a trilogy match. And the worst part about it is this was Emil Griffith's second world title win. He defeated Betty the Kid Parrott in his first title fight win, wins it back again. And he even said in an interview on Don Murphy, the ABC that he was interviewed at the time, showed and talked about it. When they also had the first time they ever showed instant replay in U.S. television history, looking back on that fight, which is crazy that they showed it. When realizing it, Emil was uncomfortable, and everything that happened yesterday, it didn't matter. He tried to run to the hospital to see where Benny was at the time. While being there, running through the streets, he was being insulted by passerbys. It was bad. But guys, the worst part about it is Ruby Goldstein would never referee a fight again. Technically, Ruby Goldstein would get his license back until he would have one referee fight again, March of 1964, before retiring permanently. And he was a veteran at the time. He came under criticisms for not stopping the fight sooner. But Goldstein in 1964, during after when he retired from boxing, that he never blamed himself because some of the people blamed me for not stopping it sooner. Yeah. He even said, if the fight were being fought right now, I wouldn't stop it sooner. And he actually pointed this out. He said that Parrott was a good, durable fighter and who looked in trouble early in the round. And by the way, guys, there was a moment in the third trilogy match where Parrott got Emil in trouble in the early first 6 or so rounds, where he did caught Emil Griffith with some amazing punches that was giving him the advantage in the fight, which did cause Emil Griffith to almost lose the third fight, which thank God he survived, but maybe he should have stopped the fight there. But he even pointed out that even though he came back to fire punches to win rounds, because he did point out that the Kid Parrott would come back to win rounds to fight hard, giving the champion a chance to fight back. That's almost like talking about the referee giving Tyson Fury a chance to fight back when he was knocked down round 9 by Alexander Usyk in the first fight, and the referee gave him a chance. Ruby Goldstein did the same thing to Benny the Kid Parrott. He gave him a chance, and it cost him. The thing is, he also said that Benny the Kid Parrott would have a reputation of feigning his injuries, while Griffith's reputation, maybe at his early age and his early years, was a poor finisher. That's what Ruby Goldstein said. And another theory is that Goldstein was afraid that Parrott's supporters would riot if he stopped the fight for any means necessary. When he revealed himself that he was scared by the event, having nightmares of severe insomnia and flashbacks to the fight. Everything went on, the New York State Athletic Commissioner, and everything went on. And even though his license to referee fights lapsed during his time, but he just never refereed the fight again. It was controversy from what this was. It just goes to show you that with all of this going on, would you blame Ruby Goldstein for this? The thing is, guys, back in the old days, professional boxing referees were a thing back then. Like, guys, remember when Jess Willard was knocked down 3 to 5 or 7 times against Jack Dempsey in the first of his world champion back in 1918? Guys, how many of you people remember when Jack Dempsey fought in one of his fights back in 1923 or 22 when he fought a guy that he knocked him down 11 times in the first round and got back up to continue the rest of some of the other rounds? Back in those days, guys, referees were never meant to say, we're waving the fight off. Back in those days, were referees saying, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, are you ready to go? Come on. Back in those days, referees never said, okay, let me see your gloves. Okay, hey, come walk towards me. Guys, back in those days, referees were not as strict as they are today. Just goes to show you that the world of what referee boxing back then was really different. It was hard to deduct points or disqualifications with them. Unless if you're Wyatt Earp helping out Jack Sharkey defeat Bob Fitzsimmons, the former world heavyweight champion back in the late of 1890s. Yes, Wyatt Earp, the gunslinger, was a referee, and he helped Jack Sharkey to become a winner by disqualification. Guys, back in those days, referees were not as strict as they are today, and it is what it is. But looking back at it, I really can't say much about it other than it is what it is. As for Emil Griffith, considering that Benny the Kid Parrott's 50th professional fight ended as it did, Emil Griffith went on to push his career as best he could. He went on to become a super welterweight champion, which was recognized by Australian Boxing Board of Control with no other agencies back in 1962. So the super welterweight division was never a thing until the latter part of, like the super welterweight was barely a little bit new at the time. This was during a time when other weight classes were starting to get the mix of super welterweight, super lightweight, this or that. So yeah, weight classes were becoming things back then. So, and of course he went on to lose fights against Luis Manuel Rodriguez, but win in a rematch for his third welterweight title, and then move on to become, well, a middleweight champion by 1966. He lost against Nino Benevitu in 67, won in a rematch in 67 months later against the Italian fighter, who actually passed away in May the 20th of 2025 at the age of 87, just a couple months ago. And, well, Nino defeated Emil in March the 4th, 1968 in their third rematch as a two-time middleweight champion for Emil. Yeah. 3 weight class champion, 3 welterweights, 1 super welterweight, and 2 middleweights. He went on to fight other fights in 69 against Jose Naples for welterweight, but lost it. Had another match for middleweight in 71 against Carlos Monzon, and had a rematch with him again in 73, but after his fight in 1976 for the WBC light middleweight title for super welterweight against Eckhard Dag, which ended in a 15-round majority decision during his final years in boxing, goes to show you Emil Griffith never gave up. And yes, he would retire a year later after having 3 more wins in October, December, and February after that loss. And then in April, July, and another fight in July against Alan Minter. July the 30th would be his last fight against Alan Minter, former British champion, which ended with Emil losing. Emil Griffith only had 24 losses in his career, with 2 knockout losses, 21 decisions, and 1 disqualification. And even though he only had 23%, 23 knockouts in his 85 wins, it just goes to show you Emil was a tough dude, but he was never a knockout person. And I think I understood why Ruby Goldstein never stopped the fight, because he was never a knockout artist as much. But you got to understand, Benny the Kid Parrott had 2 wins and 4 losses in his last 6 fights. In his last 7 fights, it was now 5 losses. So when you have a guy that was already losing fights at the time, even if there were devastating losses, like the round 13 knockout loss that he did in the first fight with Emil Griffith, it makes you wonder you should have stopped the fight. And even though Benny the Kid Parrott seemed like he was still in a good shape at the time and feeling tough, yeah. The worst part about this is that television would hold off for another decade because of this. Which is also the reason why my number 1 pick for the worst trilogy of all time is Emil Griffith versus Benny the Kid Parrott. And I'm standing to that to this very day. Man. So that's all I have to say, guys. Wow, I can't believe it's been over 1 hour already. So I hope you viewers enjoyed this podcast. My throat's sore, but I'm just happy I'm done. I'm just going to watch some YouTubers vlogging videos of golf videos. I'll show you, I'm not going to show you viewers much about my new house apartment that I'm living in, but we'll see about that in the future. I just want to get things settled in right now. And even though tomorrow, as tomorrow is going to be the Amanda Serrano versus Katie Taylor fight, and as this video is recording, the fight is already happening. So we'll see what happens next time, but man, I'm glad I'm done with this. Thank you for watching this, and with that being said, the Fox Wolf says, see you next time.